Jason Harper never imagined that tending his own garden could spark a full-blown battle with the neighborhood HOA, which demanded the removal of his beloved tractor. At the center of this absurd conflict was Glenn Whitman, the HOA president, whose rigid rules and icy authority seemed designed to punish Jason's independence. But Jason had a plan that turned the tables, parking his tractor right in front of the meeting hall and forcing the board to face the consequences of their overreach. And just wait to see how this bold move reshaped the neighborhood, proving that one determined individual could triumph, and justice, in the end, prevailed. Jason Harper had spent the better part of the morning in the golden fields behind his farmhouse, tending to his small but thriving garden. The sun cast long shadows across the freshly tilled soil, and the familiar hum of his tractor felt like a comforting companion as he worked. Returning home always carried a sense of quiet satisfaction. The little patch of land he nurtured was more than just a garden. It was his sanctuary, a tangible proof of his independence and care. He loved the rhythm of the soil, the gentle engine of his tractor, and the way he could shape the land with his own hands. As Jason turned onto his suburban street, the familiar rows of houses and trimmed lawns usually offered him a sense of calm. He waved to a neighbor tending her roses, enjoying the ordinary peaceful rhythm of the community. But that day, something felt off. The mailbox at his own property was overflowing, and among the usual junk mail was a crisp, official-looking envelope bearing the emblem of the HOA. Homeowners Association. Jason had received letters before, but something about the weight and the formal seal made a pit form in his stomach. With a sense of casual curiosity, he pulled over and tore open the envelope. The words inside hit him like a sudden gust of wind. "Your tractor violates community rules. Immediate removal is required." For a moment, Jason just stared, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the lines over and over. He felt the blood drain from his face as the words sank in. A tractor. Him. In his own driveway. The absurdity of the accusation was almost comical, if it weren't so infuriating. Jason's bright red tractor, his pride and joy, the very tool he used to keep his own property in order, was suddenly deemed a menace to the neighborhood. The sensation of disbelief was quickly followed by a profound sense of betrayal. This wasn't a minor complaint about noise or an overgrown hedge. This was a direct attack on something that was a part of him. The HOA, which he had once trusted to maintain fair and reasonable community standards, had chosen to wield bureaucracy like a weapon. Jason felt a surge of helplessness. He knew the letter represented more than just a piece of paper. It carried the weight of rules, fines, and the potential for conflict with neighbors who, until now, had seemed ordinary and friendly. He glanced at the tractor parked neatly in his driveway, its engine still warm from morning work. The machine gleamed in the afternoon sun, every scratch and dent a testament to years of care and attention. And yet, in the eyes of the HOA, it was suddenly a violation, a source of disturbance. Jason's chest tightened. How could something so ordinary, so personal, be labeled as a threat? How could rules written by a few self-appointed neighbors dictate the tools he used to live his life? Jason sank onto the porch steps, holding the letter in one hand and the tractor keys in the other. The familiar landscape of his quiet street felt strange, hostile even, as if the orderly lawns and tidy sidewalks had transformed overnight into a landscape of judgment. Shock lingered in his mind, swirling with questions and doubts. He had never imagined that the simple act of owning a tractor, something so mundane and practical, could ignite a confrontation with authority in the very community he had chosen as his home. For the first time, Jason felt the unsettling weight of bureaucracy pressing down on him, turning his peaceful neighborhood into a battlefield he hadn't anticipated. The sun was still shining. The wind still rustled through the trees, but for Jason, the world had shifted. His sense of security had been replaced by a tense awareness. This fight, however unexpected, was now unavoidable. As the days passed, Jason Harper's initial shock slowly hardened into something far heavier: hatred. It was a quiet, simmering anger at first, like a low ember glowing beneath the surface. But with each new interaction with the HOA, it grew hotter, consuming more of his thoughts. He discovered that the organization wasn't simply enforcing rules, they were targeting him. Every email he received, every phone call from the board, and every casual meeting at which his complaints were dismissed or ignored piled onto that growing fire of resentment. At the center of it all was Glenn Whitman, the president of the HOA. Glenn was the kind of man whose presence seemed to command attention without needing to raise his voice. His ice-cold stare could make even the most confident neighbor second-guess themselves, and his reputation for running the board with an iron grip was well known. Jason had once tried to engage him politely, hoping to reason, to explain that his tractor was simply a tool for maintaining his property, nothing more. But Glenn had listened only long enough to nod before brushing him off with a polite yet cutting remark about community standards. Jason soon learned that Glenn had called a special meeting with the board specifically to tighten the rules around vehicles, landscaping, and property aesthetics. The language in the new regulations was precise, almost surgical. Words like visual harmony and safety concerns peppered the document. To any outsider, it might have sounded like a reasonable attempt at order, but Jason knew better. Everyone in the neighborhood had seen how selectively the rules were enforced, and it was painfully obvious that they were aimed squarely at him. His tractor, his independent approach to caring for his land, and his refusal to conform to the stifling whims of the HOA had made him a target. Every encounter seemed to fan the flames further. A phone call from Glenn explaining procedures felt like a lecture from someone who considered him a problem rather than a neighbor. Invitations to community discussions became veiled warnings: smile and comply, or face the consequences. Even casual conversations with neighbors meant to gauge support revealed a subtle unease. Some were hesitant to speak, afraid of taking sides. Jason felt the walls closing in. What should have been a supportive, ordinary suburban network had turned into a web of judgment and control. And yet, the hatred that boiled inside him wasn't mindless. It was precise, directed, and fueled by a profound sense of injustice. He hated the way Glenn wielded rules like weapons, how the board cloaked personal dislike in bureaucratic language, and how his simple act of living independently could provoke such orchestrated hostility. Every dismissal of his concerns felt like a reminder that some people valued conformity over fairness, control over understanding, and appearance over reality. Late at night, Jason would sit on his porch, staring at his red tractor in the driveway, tracing its contours with a longing glare. That machine, a simple tool of cultivation, had become a symbol of resistance. He replayed every conversation, every meeting, every unfair notice in his mind, letting the anger build. It wasn't blind rage. It was strategic, measured, and growing sharper with each passing day. The world he had once considered calm and orderly now seemed petty, rigid, and hostile, and he refused to submit quietly. By the end of the week, Jason realized that his emotions had evolved. Shock had passed. Hatred had taken its place, full-bodied and resolute. It was no longer simply about the tractor. It was about fairness, independence, and refusing to bow to arbitrary authority. Every glance at the letter, every phone call from Glenn, every comment about community standards only cemented the truth. The battle ahead would not be easy, but Jason was no longer afraid. He was angry, and that anger had purpose. The morning of the next monthly HOA meeting, Jason Harper felt a surge of energy, unlike anything he had experienced before. The weeks of endless phone calls, dismissals, and veiled threats had hardened his resolve. Today, he would not argue with words alone. Words had failed him, and bureaucracy had become a weapon. If they wanted to treat his tractor as a symbol of rebellion, he would turn it into a statement that no one could ignore. He arrived early, the sun casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets, the familiar rows of houses suddenly feeling like a stage set for confrontation. Jason's bright red tractor gleamed in the morning light, polished and ready, a silent but formidable presence. Neighbors passing by slowed their cars, curious at the unusual sight of a single tractor sitting proudly in the middle of the driveway leading to the meeting hall. Some shook their heads, others whispered to themselves, but everyone sensed that something was about to unfold. Inside the meeting hall, the board was just settling in. Glenn Whitman, as always, radiated an aura of authority. His crisp suit and perfect posture suggested that he had never been challenged, never been forced to face a neighbor who refused to play by their rules. But today, the balance of power was about to shift in a way that words alone could never achieve. Jason drove the tractor with deliberate precision, the engine humming steadily, announcing his presence more loudly than any protest could. He parked it directly in front of the main entrance. The room fell silent. Murmurs rose and fell like small waves crashing against a dam. Some neighbors stared in shock, some stifled chuckles, but all eyes were on him. Glenn's face turned an unmistakable shade of crimson, his composed demeanor cracking in real time. "Jason, what is the meaning of this?" Glenn demanded, his voice tight with barely contained fury. Jason stepped down from the tractor, his boots crunching lightly on the pavement. He faced the board, his expression calm but resolute. "If you ban my tractor," he said, letting his voice carry without a hint of hesitation, "then my tractor bans you." The words, simple yet loaded, struck the room like a jolt of electricity. Some neighbors blinked, trying to reconcile their disbelief with the clarity of the statement. Glenn flailed for a response, opening his mouth to speak, then closing it again, unsure how to reclaim authority in the presence of such deliberate, controlled defiance. Jason's rage had transformed into action. It was not a reckless, impulsive anger. It was precise, strategic, and fully within the boundaries of the law. He was not damaging property, threatening anyone, or violating rules that mattered. Instead, he had turned their obsession with control and conformity into a visible paradox. The tractor, once merely a tool, had become a symbol of freedom, independence, and resistance to arbitrary authority. Neighbors began to murmur again, this time with a mix of admiration and incredulity. A few of Glenn's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing that the carefully constructed image of absolute control could be undermined not by debate, but by quiet, deliberate defiance. Jason remained steady, letting the weight of his presence speak for itself, allowing his calm determination to amplify the absurdity of the rules that had threatened him. In that moment, rage became more than emotion. It became a statement. Every beep of the tractor's horn, every deliberate step Jason took carried a message. Independence could not be legislated away. He had turned the instruments of oppression into a mirror, reflecting the arbitrary and absurd nature of the HOA's authority back onto them. The room, once filled with judgment and control, now pulsed with a tension that was at once frightening, liberating, and exhilarating. Jason didn't need to yell or argue further. His presence, his tractor, and the unshakable calm with which he faced the board spoke louder than any speech could. The rage that had been quietly building over weeks had finally found its form, and it was unmistakable, visible, undeniable, and profoundly liberating. The echoes of the tractor's hum still lingered in the air as neighbors reluctantly turned their cars around, abandoning their plans to attend the monthly HOA meeting. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt unsettled, not by danger, but by an undeniable shift in the balance of power. Word of Jason Harper's audacious move spread almost instantly. Texts buzzed on phones, hushed conversations echoed in driveways, and the social media neighborhood group exploded with debates, memes, and admiration. Jason's name was on everyone's lips, but not as a troublemaker. Rather, he had become a symbol of reason, courage, and unwavering conviction. Inside the now empty meeting hall, Glenn Whitman and the HOA board sat in stunned silence. The polished rules and carefully orchestrated authority, which had seemed absolute for so long, now looked fragile and arbitrary. Their attempts to justify the tractor ban had crumbled under the weight of visibility, literally and figuratively. Even Glenn, usually rigid and imperious, could not ignore the glaring message. The community would no longer accept the enforcement of rules that lacked fairness or logic. By the end of the day, the HOA had no choice but to revise their policies. The tractor ban was lifted, the overreach acknowledged, and a quiet, undeniable acknowledgement of Jason's right to live freely prevailed. Jason returned to his farm under the soft golden glow of the late afternoon sun, a quiet smile spreading across his face. Each turn of the tractor wheels as he plowed his garden felt heavier with significance, not because of labor, but because of the triumph embedded in every motion. The soil beneath him seemed almost symbolic, a canvas for independence, resilience, and the freedom to live without unwarranted interference. He could feel the satisfaction coursing through him, not just as a fleeting pleasure, but as the profound reward of justice restored. Neighbors began to greet him differently too. No longer was he the man merely tinkering with a tractor in his yard. He was the neighbor who had stood firm against arbitrary rules, who had challenged the status quo without malice, and who had done so with dignity and intelligence. Children waved as he drove past, some imitating the roar of the tractor with wide-eyed excitement. Even those who had once whispered judgments behind closed doors nodded respectfully as he passed, recognizing that one determined individual had indeed shifted the narrative of the community. The tractor itself took on a new meaning. It was no longer just a tool for maintaining gardens or lawns. It became a beacon of personal freedom, an emblem of standing firm for one's rights without crossing the line into chaos. Every shine on its red paint reflected not only sunlight, but the collective acknowledgement that independence and justice could coexist in a civilized society. Jason often paused for a moment, hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, appreciating the simple yet profound truth. Courage paired with calm determination could bend even the strictest structures toward fairness. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of pink and amber, Jason looked over his property with a sense of serenity that had been missing for months. He understood something fundamental. The satisfaction of victory is not merely in having one's way, but in proving that standing up for what is right, even against rules, authority, or inertia, creates a lasting ripple effect. His tractor had become a symbol of resilience, but more importantly, it was a reminder that one person who believes in their rights cannot easily be broken. And in that quiet, victorious evening, Jason Harper felt a rare, unshakable peace. The battle had been waged, the absurdity exposed, and justice, in its simplest yet most satisfying form, had been served. His independence had triumphed, leaving the community to reconsider the meaning of rules, respect, and the power of a single, determined individual.